everybody. Welcome to Life with Gains. I'm Esther, and yes, I'm by myself because we have a special series that we're doing called Aiding Archers. And the point of this series is based upon Psalms 127 and the verse that it says, like arrows in the hands of a warrior are children born in one's youth. And as you guys know me, I'm always about aiming archers and aiming arrows, which are our kids, in the direction towards God, as well as equipping parents so that they are able to do that well. And the second part of why we're doing this short series, Aiding Archers, is based upon Hebrews 13:16. It says, and do not forget to do good and to share with others, for such sacrifices God is pleased. And there's a lot going on right now. We have social unrest, we have a pandemic, and there's a lot of people, particularly families, who are being greatly impacted. And it just really pressed upon my heart with the issues that are going on surrounding education to kind of allow friends of mine and family members of mine to come onto this platform to share with you guys from their experiences, from their expertise that would prayerfully and hopefully help you where you are, wherever you are. So, our first guest that I am so excited about having on this series is Miss Jill Gaines. She is my aunt-in-law. Can you tell? Uh, and I met her when I got married. Well, not technically, it wasn't until like a couple of years later that we met, and her and her husband have just been very impactful in our marriage, very impactful, particularly from the sector of homeschooling. If you know me, I homeschool. I have homeschooled for about 5 years in different extremes. And this woman right here was the first woman to give me insight and wisdom. And so for those of you who homeschool, I hope you are tuning in. And even if you're not homeschooling, I believe that if you're doing virtual academy or some type of virtual platform this academic year, what she says will be helpful for you. And so I just want to bring on to the platform. Miss Jill. Hi.
Hi, everybody. It's great seeing you, Esther.
I know it's so good to see you too. It's so weird because it's like, hey.
I know, right?
So if you could tell us a little bit about, what you do, your roles and your occupations at home and outside the home.
Okay. My role is very different right now. I have young adults, but they are also moving back home kind of as a result of COVID and that I will later have a surgery later this year. And they're like, we're going to spend most of our time with you, Mom. So why don't we just move back in? It also to save money. And I'm like, it sounds good. They're here most of the time anyway. So I will say that one of my role is for what I call emerging adult. They've been through school. They're still like young professionals, just getting cutting their teeth for the first year or two. That it's very different parenting. At this, what I found is that you always parent. At one time, I thought you parent till they're 18, maybe 21 if they're in college, and then you're done. But what I have found is that you parent their entire life. And so that has been adjustment in my thinking. But you parent differently, of course. They're always going to come to you at some time for advice or for your influence. And you don't have to be a perfect person, but you have to be an ear. You have to be a guide at some point, but yet still manage to be your own person, your own woman, and then see you flourish and grow from just the role that you've done. So that is one of the roles that I'm kind of still learning how to transition right now. But another new role for me is I got my degree about 2 years ago. And so I started in a career change. That is something that is new and developing for me. Pulls on all of my skills from homeschooling and being a stay-at-home mom. But now I've just stopped just caring for kids, and now I'm like caring for my community as a whole because I'm transferring those same skills. So yeah, so I'm wife, mom, worker, and just learning to embrace it all.
Could you share a little bit about that role? Because you said you're pulling from your experiences from homeschool and into this role of community. Like, what's that?
Well, I'm still doing the spiritual, emotional, physical development, but yet I'm doing it for families. One of my positions as a human services worker is I work with kinship families. So when a kinship person is someone who is taking care of a child that is not biologically their own, so it could be a grandchild or a niece, or it could be a neighbor, or friends, child, whatever. But they come into your home. There's a bond there, but there may not necessarily be a relationship. You may not even be related, such as in the case of my kinship experience. That's another day. But caring for people spiritually, when they call me and they're saying, hey, I'm afraid I'm going to get kicked out. My thing is to find community resources, to encourage them to keep going, to not say, I just feel like giving up. But it's also to make sure those kids, those families have food, that they can have a stable life so those kids don't end up back in, like, say, a foster care system or just bouncing from place to place. So they have to have a stable place where they can go to school and they can get the development that they need. So very much so, like what I
Mhm.
was doing for my kids at home, I literally am caring for a community, for a city, anyone that comes across my desk.
Oh my gosh, I love it. I love it. It's so interesting to see how um your stories develop, or God developed your story and
Mm-hmm.
using it, not just you went from in home to now outside of your community, and that's so
Right.
impactful. Um,
Right.
Man, how so with homeschooling, well, what is the age range? Uh, well, how long did you homeschool? Or from what age to what age?
Well, I say I started homeschooling actually when my oldest was 3, because
Okay.
she was ready to go to kindergarten actually at 3. But being young, she knew everything she needed to know, as writing her name, her letters, her numbers, shapes. She was even doing early subtraction and addition. But they can't go to
Yeah.
kindergarten. But I thought, okay, preschool. But we were actually in an area geographically where I didn't feel safe. We were one of 25 families of color in an entire county of about 25,000 people. And there were only 20, and most of those were biracial families. So I thought, I'm not going to subject them to that, because literally, from what I could see when we were out, there were kids, oh, is she chocolate? Can I lick her? Will she taste different? And playing with her hair. I'm like, she's not an experiment, she's a person. So I knew that sending her to preschool was not going to be a positive thing. Eventually, because all my kids are stair steps, I did send her to school because I really need to take time with the younger ones. And she was ready for more interaction. And that didn't even last 6 months because everything I had thought would happen. She was coming home very sad and depressed. What's wrong with me? Why can't my hair do this? And for some reason, she had done very well. We were going to get her a little prize from Walmart. And she would not buy a doll other than a white doll with blonde hair. Well, she didn't want to buy one. I told her, I'm not going to do that, because we've always gotten like the international, like all the
Yeah.
Barbies from every land, every
Yeah.
culture. That's what we had for them. But she was so dead set on getting a white doll because that's what she wanted to be like. And I didn't want to support that. So imagine a 3-year-old going to a store with their own money and they get in that store and refuse to buy anything because they can't buy a white doll. We left that day with nothing. That's very
Mhm.
unusual for a 3-year-old that has money in hand. So that was the experience. I said, I think I'm done, because
Mhm.
less than 6 months, uh, something was wrong with her. She didn't like herself. She had already started the trauma of it, forgetting things that she knew. She didn't know how to do work. She was second guessing her whole self. I went by, actually, this is what put the icing on the cake, the preschool, just to kind of see. They were outside playing, and my daughter was sitting over in the corner by herself. The teachers weren't paying attention to her. The other students weren't. And she was the only Black child in the entire preschool. I decided that was it. We weren't going to do that anymore. So everything I had built into her self-esteem, what she could do, and all the gains, she was so curious. She just absorbed everything like a sponge. But yet she had turned into a child I did not know.
When you said that you homeschooled from the age of 3, so did you homeschool all the way through graduation? Did you homeschool through elementary?
Middle school years, we took a break. And I sent them to a private school. Well, first they went to the best public school in the city, and that was off the chain. So I thought, let's not do this. And then we went to the best private school in the city, and they hated it, but they did really well there. But they actually asked me, could they come back home and homeschool as high schoolers? And I'm like, whoa, what are you talking about? I don't get this. I thought you always want it to be freedom. We don't get to do school like everyone else. And, why do we have to stay home? And we don't get any friends. And I'm like, you have lots of friends. And you have about 60 cousins in your city. 60 first cousins now. What are you talking about? And one of them was a homeschooling family, so we could do stuff in the day, what have you. So I let them go. I think it was good for both of us for them to go in middle school. Although I love children at every stage, middle school, especially 8th grade, was not the time. Oh my gosh. 8th grade is the worst. But anyway, the kids are really mean. They're all in puberty, and they can be pretty miserable sometimes, just because all the things that are going on in their body. So I thought, try it. Instead of fight with them, we've always been about self-regulation, self-direction, as far as being led by the Spirit, of course, but it's their life. And I wanted them to know how to, or what to do with their life when it really came their time to make all the decisions. Because just a little explanation of that is, when I was younger, I was very shielded, protected, that kind of thing. And I knew how to, find a job or go to college, but I knew nothing about my place in the world or how to function in the world. And I did not want that to be their story. So we really, I'm a very intentional person, and I really just kind of, this may be weird for some people, but I really kind of said, okay, at this age, what do they need to learn how to do in order that when they get to 17, 18, 16, they'll know how to handle this. And so with my experiences and just observing the experiences of others, I kind of put them on a track. But I made it seem really great, because I was like, hey, what do you get to do at 9 that you don't get to do when you were 8? What privileges do you earn, but responsibilities you also have to fulfill. And so for them, getting a year older meant they got more privilege. It never stayed the same, but it also meant they had to show how responsible they could be to handle those privileges. And I never once had to take away privileges from them, no matter what their age was, because they understood they were looking forward to getting the skills for the responsibility so that they could have the privileges. So now I'm thinking, how did I get to that? Why did I get there? But anyway, that was my
years.
Gotcha. So in middle school, when they really wanted to go to school, I didn't want to come in like controlling and heavy-handed. I wanted them to learn. It was a decision I felt that they could make, and I was letting them know about the things that they would have to experience and be exposed to, and were they preparing themselves to be ready for that. And they said they were. So then it was just the next thing to do. But what was funny is, after being there for 2 years, they were like, can we come home? And I'm like, they had a meeting. We always had family meetings, and we also had like a morning meeting, even when they were going to school, kind of like borrowing a little bit from Montessori. We always had a morning meeting. We would see where each other was, what their needs were that day, what the schedule was, and then we, go off. So in one of those times, they said, hey, these are the reasons we want to homeschool again. This is what we're hoping. This has been
Wow.
what happened from us going to school. And it wasn't that it was a bad thing. They just realized they had a better deal at home. And although I'm going to be honest, I thought, oh, yes, they're in school. I still was running back and forth. But I was thinking, man, coming back home, what is it going to be like with teenagers when as tweens, they were like getting a little bit too much for
Mm,
me, for my liking. But we walked through with it. We just kind of took that theme of, okay, as long as you continue to be responsible for yourself, as long as you self-regulate, we're not doing the disrespect. This is how I think we should talk about things. What are your ideas about that? And we hammered out how we would do homeschooling in their last 3 years. And that's it went from there, and it was actually a good experience because what I ended up doing is putting them in the community college. My husband at the time was working at a community
I
college, one of the
remember
best in the whole nation. Right. And so they took their math and their science, and I really wanted them to at least think about a STEM career, be prepared to go into a STEM career. And we just didn't have the materials. We didn't have the interact questions that they would have with other students that I felt they really needed to prepare them for that. So we did that, and I did like all the humanities, the English, the history,
that.
those kind of things, any extra. Because in the state of Ohio, where I am, as a homeschooler, we have to do what even the kids that go to public school don't, and that is we have to teach all subjects every single year, in spite of, say, like for high school, if they've had health or gym in their ninth grade
Mhm.
year, they don't have to do it the rest of the years. But as a homeschooler, you have to do gym, health, some type of
Oh,
both, all the years of high school. So that's the kind of way they were being really funny. They were already going to do 4 years of math, 4 years of science and reading, English, those kind of things. But so I had to do music every single year. We had to do language 4 years. So they did everything 4 years straight to graduate with high school. But our sweet spot was that with the college credit plus is what it's called here, or
mm.
just basically they guide high school and college credit for doing it. So really they would have been prepared for a 2-year degree, to graduate with a 2-year degree at the same time they graduated from high school. But at the time, since it was such a new thing, we did not have them graduate from high school because that would have knocked them out of scholarships, freshman scholarships, where there were more 4-year scholarships. They would have been considered a transfer student, which means they wouldn't have gotten the money. And
Right,
in all of their little life, I said, say scholarship, because that's what you're going
right,
to college. So
right.
anyway, maybe make a long story short, that's kind of how we prepared mentally, emotionally, cognitively, to move forward. So that whole time that we had them, the 2 years they were out of school, it was all like steps, incremental steps
Yeah,
to get where they were going to eventually go. And that self-regulation, that self-determination, having that autonomy was part of it.
I didn't know about middle school, and it's funny because I used to be a 7th grade language arts teacher, and you're talking about 8th graders, and I was like, 7th and 8th grade, both of them at like I don't know what. But
Yes.
and so I could see parents being like, "Oh, you going to middle school? We not doing this at the house."
Right.
But
And I thought I was done after that, but it was like, no. Yeah, when you told me that you were a middle school teacher, I thought that is a very special person. I do not see how, but I mean, really, they're great all through. When you're going through and you're raising children, there's something wonderful about every stage, just like there's something challenging. And we have to be careful. It's just my little pitch, how we contextualize these
mm,
stages and where they are, because they will internalize that. So I really had to check myself with that.
that's how I feel about the whole terrible twos argument, and
Yes,
it can be
yes.
very hard. But I
Mm,
think if you flip it, I think we didn't. I don't know what we said, training twos, or we don't even put a phrase behind it. It was just like
Right.
they're learning, they're trying to figure things out. It's like the
Mhm,
first
mhm.
phase of middle school almost.
I call it the first adolescence. I do.
Yeah, that
That's
2 to
how
3
I
range.
label flipped on it. This is the first adolescence.
Yes, and
How
now we
you
have
treat
one.
that one will determine how the second one goes.
Oh, Lord. Don't say that.
It's true. It's true.
That makes me nervous. Um, so you technically homeschooled elementary, um, was didn't do middle school. Down here in North Carolina, middle school was 6th, 7th, and 8th.
Mhm, mhm,
Um, and then you came back home and homeschool of their own accord. So if you could just think about, because I kind of want to touch on both age ranges. When you
mhm,
were doing pre-K elementary, what were some things like just practically that worked when you they were home? And I'm kind of like not looking for curriculum because you already know curriculum
mhm,
we can go forever.
mhm, mhm.
Um, but just what there were a couple of things that you mentioned to me before about, well, I'll let you, yeah, what worked for you in the pre-K, elementary, and then high school phases at home?
What worked is realizing that for kids, the whole world is a big classroom.
Mhm.
Every moment is a teaching moment. So it needs to be, again, adopting from some of the Montessori things. Things need to be on their level, need to be accessible, and needs to be inviting. That says that learning is just what you do. It's not a
Mhm.
special place for it. There's not a special way that you do it. You know, people have the church face, the ugly face. There's no kind of special way you have to be in order to learn. You just be. So I think that because children learn through play, very much so at that age, uh, your whole environment needs to be conducive to that. Another thing I would say that's really important for the teacher is that they have to be aware and understand child development, how the
Mhm.
stages lead to one another. Because basically, a child may not stay in a stage for a long time. Different kids are different, but they will progress through all those stages. And for most of the time, they are linear. They will be one before the other, before the other. Again, they can go through the stages in 6 months, or they may take 5 years. It all depends on that child's level and the environment and what's going on, social, emotional. So being aware of that, where they are in the stages, what's coming next, you can kind of prepare for that. So I have what I call my bonus daughter, and her children are 18 months and 4 years old. And at that stage, you know, you're enjoying their little, they're cute, that there are times you're like, oh, I just want them to be older. I said,
Mhm.
well, you can kind of possibly aid them by making the environment conducive for them to progress. But if you kind of hold them up, they'll stay like in a babyish state because they aren't ready. So as a child, that's a good example is a child that's being picked up all the time is not going to learn to run as fast, is not going to feel as comfortable venturing off, toddling off, because they're used to being held. But if you have that environment, all kinds of inviting things, and you put it here and they have to work to get there, they're going to learn to walk, to crawl, army crawl.
Mhm.
They're going to get there because there's something that they want. So you set your environment up. If you want your children to be more independent, you can't do everything for them. You have to put it at a level, have something their size, and really encourage it. Show them how to do it with them, mimic it, and they will begin to do that. So you can't push somebody through development, but you can certainly aid them, and they will respond.
Mhm.
So getting through those early years is, again, making an environment that's conducive for learning, uh, understanding their developmental stage where they are, and even at that stage, they give you a lot of cues into who they are, their personality, you know, who they are as a person, and you can even use that to inspire them and to interest them and engage them. So As far as curriculum, I used everything. We were at the library all the time. My friends would tease me that y'all don't go to the library and get books. You go to the library and get shelves of
Mm,
books. It's like,
yep.
if it works, because my thing is have it there. If they want it, it's ready for them. If they don't, find something else that is. So reading materials, writing materials, science. You don't have cornstarch and sugar and salt and you're doing your early chemistry. Hey, you mix this with this, this is the actual mixture. This is a solution. And they start learning the language of chemistry. And what
Mm,
happens if you add heat? What happens if you make it cold? There's a lot of things that are just, kids are natural scientists. So instead of telling them, I ask a lot of questions and let
mm,
them discover, and then they're going to tell me. So that's just how it's called a Socratic method, is that instead of giving an answer when kids ask you a question, you ask them a question back, and then you send them off to discover and to be curious, and then they'll come back and tell you what they found out. And that's learning that's going to stick versus sit down. We have this experiment today. I want you to do this. I want you to do that. It's like, well, what happens if you do that? What? Are you
mm,
serious? That's called, this combustion or whatever. Of course, we're outside when we're
mm.
doing stuff like that. But yeah, and we do. We get one of my daughters love for things to blow up. To see it skip when you have magnets, or really strong magnets, and they can actually make
Wow.
things flip and travel. Oh my gosh. So it's a lot of things, but first be interested, understand the development so you know how to set up their environment to be conducive for learning. I would say those are the biggest things.
I know one thing you told me was, I mean, you basically kind of said it's like your house is your classroom. So like you had
The world is your classroom,
the world is your
actually.
classroom and you like label
Yes.
stuff and like I think that was a you'll probably attest to this. That was so hard for me because I was like, wait, so they gotta be everywhere? Like I can have a room. But
Pretty
I'm like
much.
getting it. I get it now. Like
Hmm.
I'm slowly like, okay,
And
that
the
it
dollar
really
store is your friend. You can get anything
girl,
at dollar store,
yes.
and when you mess it up, who cares? It was $1. Okay, now by the time I leave there, I've spent $50, and you're like,
Oh,
oh, you messed up $50, but it feels better to say it was only $1. It's okay.
right. See, you may well know. I'd be like, I need a Dollar Tree certificate or like,
Yeah,
you don't understand.
just give me a gift card. Let's go for
We are
it.
good. That is so good to hear. Well, so in terms of high school, how did that work, homeschool? Because at that age, you're very independent. How do you?
Wait, you skipped older elementary.
I'm sorry. Go back. Go back. Let's go to elementary.
I
Upper
love
L.
that stage. Yes, I loved elementary because they're just now getting independent enough. They're just now beginning to connect ideas and thoughts and really start to use the information that they're getting. Because when they're younger, they're just information gatherers. But by the time they hit that fourth, fifth, sixth, they're really starting to internalize and use it and then come up with their own questions. I love the whole make your own test. And as long as it is over the material that we discussed and you do well on it, that's your test. They were like, wait,
Mm,
what? Make my own test? I'm like, yeah. Because for me, it wasn't about finding a hard test and saying, can you do it? It's about, if you're going to make your own test, that means you have already thought of what ingredients do I need? What
mhm.
information do I need? What's the outcome? I'm going to have to write these answers down. They've taken time and energy with it. And that means you're solidifying their learning because they're not just responding to questions, they're developing the questions, they're responding, and they're thinking further. So
Mm.
really, really utilizing the knowledge that they have gained already as an 8, 9, and 10-year-old. And also, I heavily use, honestly, incentives. So again, that dollar store thing. So I think I told you what I used, something like I'm really good with these ideas. I come up with them, I love them. But the attitude allowance was one of the things that was so effective. People are like, oh, they're getting so ornery. Oh, they're doing this. And they are, that 8, 9, 10, because they're realizing they have a mouth and they can use it. So
They have facial expressions like their mama and they can use
exactly. And
it.
duh, and all that. And you're like, okay, a little bit too much. But I had what I call an attitude allowance. And that is, of course, they had things like their chores and things like that. And there was a dollar amount tied to everything. But if their
Mm.
attitude wasn't right, I also took away. I subtracted from that. I minus from that. But I had a whole really big elaborate chart that I thought of because I knew my kids. What would add to and what would take away from. But they could get up to, like $20 in a month. But they could also lose probably 15 of that with their attitude. But I never
Mm.
made it to where they could lose everything. They
Okay.
had to at least be able to have $5 for thetheir efforts and their failures
Okay.
because it gave them hope to want to continue on. But I capped it kind of at 20 because I'm not going broke. All you kids, yeah, you're already
I'm
But
like
for
20 times.
them, exactly. But let me tell you, that taught such self-regulation because they know where they wanted to get. And they were aware that if I do particular things, it's going to limit my opportunity. That was my word, for their whole life is opportunity. You always want opportunity. Okay. And you want to be able to determine your choices from opportunity, not something that people set for you. You want options. So they had to look at what they wanted in life in their little 8, 9, 10, 12-year-old life and determine how to manage their own behavior because of what they wanted.
Mm.
So instead of me being the controller and me being the big boss, you're actually sitting in the seat of power. What you do with it, there's going to be ultimate power with me. But I believe that you can make good choices and that once you endure consequences, you'll learn how to manage the consequences even. Get back up and keep moving forward. So while there was a lot of skill, I use that a lot for the chores, the
Mm.
attitude, friendships, trying not to say, well, you can't be friends with that person because they did such and such and such. Just kind of let them, it took a lot of prayer, develop those friendships. But, when they started seeing how they were acting when another kid came around, there's a lot of, I don't like her, she's not my friend. Let's talk about her. Let's bash her. But then it's like, oh, so how do you feel when you're
Mm.
together? And a lot of them, they're like, I feel fine, because they're like humans. They don't want to admit that they're wrong. They don't want to show that there's a problem. But there's always going to be something that happens. And
Right.
sometimes I pray for that thing to happen. Like, God, please let this teaching moment really count for them so
Mm-hmm.
that they could write up, shall I say, set it right when they realized it was going wrong. Was what is God saying to you? What do you think you need to do? How would you feel if you were in that other person's shoes? Doing a lot of that instead of a lot of telling. And it just really allowed them to process themselves and get a better understanding of themselves early. So as far as school, there was a lot of social emotional development. But as far as school, by that time, they were in the critical thinking. They could deduce, they could induce. They were fully aware of that. So that by the time they hit 10, they were fully aware. They could do their schooling any day of the week that they wanted to. They could
Mm-hmm.
choose when they were going to do their classes. But if I saw that they weren't getting things done, then I said, okay, we went to our block scheduling. Today is math and science day. You have this whole day. Let me see where you are. If you're not progressing, I have to kind of step in and help you
Mm-hmm.
get on track. So we have to have this much done, in a week or in a month. How are you coming along on that? They would check off, I had little charts and they would check off where they were. And so that gave them a lot of little, like simple responsibility, but that's how they learn to manage it. So I love those middle or what they call older elementary years. It
Yeah.
was really a joy.
So with the high school, I kind of want to twist it a little bit because your kids are in their lower to mid 20s. Well, you kind of have lower, mid, and upper 20s.
Hmm.
Um, and so with the high schoolers right now, obviously a lot of them didn't experience
Right.
what they would have in
Early
the
on.
spring. Yeah. And then they're going into a very different environment. Down here,
Hmm.
everybody's virtual for
Hmm.
a long period of time. I
Yeah.
don't think high schooler, I think they're going to be like the last ones to go back to face to face. And
Hmm.
so they're going to be on virtual academy, homeschool. It's not homeschool, but
I understand
technically,
it.
yeah. So what do you recommend, or what are some practical things that would help parents with their high school students during this time?
It could be a very positive thing. I do want to just go back and reiterate that my kids did virtual school basically from second grade all the way to seventh. So it
Okay.
was, I used I guess it was considered charter school at the time, but really all the responsibility was on you at that time.
Mhm.
They would just make sure that they had signed in by the end of the week for enough hours. But when and
Mm,
how you did them, they didn't really, it wasn't a lot of oversight, or correcting, so to speak. So they kind of had that experience, and that is what they went back to um, later. But I want to say there's a few things you need to know really about truly helping a student, because I also did tutoring, and most
mhm,
of my kids that I did tutoring with, they had ADHD and some tactile learning styles, different
mhm.
things where they weren't visual, they weren't just picking it up, and maybe they didn't excuse me, maybe they didn't know exactly how to lead their own education,
Right.
because to me they've
Mhm.
been in a public school, they tell you everything to do, you just do it, but you're not connecting your learning. And that may be the case. You also find that your kids will have a lot of gaps, where you realize, wow, they haven't really been reading on school level, or they never learned multiplication and division, right, which is why they can't do this algebra 2 or geometry.
Mhm.
You find that that is the case. So the thing is, you want to find out where they really are, as far as their skill level, and then begin to build up. They have to do the grade level of schooling that is actually the virtual academy where that is. But if you can,
Mhm.
you'll want to add in some enrichment that really deals with the level where they are. How I kind of uh, set the time up as we would have like a good instruction time where I say, hey, this is how you do this, this is how you do this. You're free to ask any questions. We'll work through any problems. And I didn't know all of the answers. I just knew where to find the answers. So don't let
Right.
that, be a deterrent or something to scare. I had the answer key and I relied on it. But when we use the examples, again, that whole scaffolding, they're learning, that whole learning step by step is they show you how to do the problem, that first page, walking through the steps, what needs to happen here. And I just use my logic to understand. And sometimes I was learning right alongside them. If you know how to read, you can learn anything. So for one, it's just strengthening those reading skills, that comprehension skills, and that's a whole nother day. Once you're reading, there's so many little skills in between reading, such as comprehending, decoding, inferring, uh, the meaning, all that kind
Yeah.
of thing that goes
Yeah.
into reading. But you take the time to do it, and it's not a matter of let's get 10 to 25 problems done. Is if we get 2 done and we understand what happened, and the next day I can tell you what I did, then that might just be where we are.
Mhm.
Because my thing is, as long as you're able to get initially between a 70 and an 80, you're passing.
Mm.
That may be where we start, but hopefully that won't be where we finish. If
Got
you
it.
take the time to start where you are and build up, not create all the stress to be 100% or 80% from the beginning, when you've
Mm.
had basically you're 2 years behind, if you want to call it that, start where you are.
Mm.
Make your best attempts. Apply the effort, the consistency for those who don't want to learn, those who may have ADHD and their minds are going too quickly. For me, I always had sensory items,
Right.
a squishy ball. Maybe they needed to walk while they did it. Sometimes we took a walk and we did times table and threw the ball. Sometimes we were doing
Mhm.
frisbee and going over rote facts so that they can do their harder math problems later. It wasn't all sitting down at a table. Most of the time, the brain works better, it gets cooking when you're moving.
Very true for
So
boys particularly.
absolutely, but I found it just for young kids or people who with
Mhm.
ADHD for sure.
Mm.
We did exercise every single morning, but it wasn't like, let's do 10 jumping jacks. That was like a warm up. We actually had fun. They had a list of activities that they could choose on any given day. And even if it was baseball or track, that's what we did. We had skills, basic skills that we were going to do, whatever they want to do. You got a high schooler who wants to play basketball, go ahead and work on those different shots. And by the time they come back in, whether it's an hour later, from one, they've built up their body, they're feeling
Right.
good, their blood's pumping. Then you start tackling that math. And a lot of times they're going to go straight down. They're going to feel that brain fog that comes. It's like, just breathe. They'll grab
Mm.
these, make sure you have an after workout snack. And we're
Right.
just going to make this talking. Let's
Right.
work through these things. And again, when you're first starting, if you have a student that is challenged with their schoolwork or just doesn't particularly enjoy school, start it out slow and just talk to
Mm.
that. I mean, we are in a pandemic. I heard one parent say this: kids' brains aren't working on full just because they do internalize that anxiety. We have
Okay.
social unrest. We're
Yeah.
looking at all this stuff we got kids that are involved in the political system, which right, good, but they're like, who's going to be president in November? Those are real issues that are
Yeah.
concerning them. And so you must realize you've got to do things for self-care. You got to blow off some of that steam. You got to
Mhm.
deal with the anxiety if you want a child to learn. Now, don't let them play
Right.
you, but that is real. That's real. And again, that whole self-determination, I'll say this last, is that, okay, um, what do you want to do when you're grown up? Do you want to go to college? Do you want to do an apprenticeship? Do you want to go to the military? Do you want to just start working? What kind of money you're trying to make? What do you need to live? I use those as motivators. Just actually, when they come to high school and I dealt with my high school groups, that's what we did first, because
Mm.
then they have a motivation for learning. They're starting to connect. Oh, so actually $15 an hour gets me this much gross, but then I got to pay these taxes, then I got to pay the union, and then I got to do this. And when I get my money, it's like I only got like 70% of what I just made. And they're like, oh, you mean you can't pay rent? You can't run cable? You can't pay your cell phone bill? You can't buy a new cell phone? With that, what you gonna do? And they realize, like, I gotta do something,
Right.
whatever it is, and not illegal, but you gotta do something. You have to
Okay.
connect what this learning means, so they can begin to say, no matter how hard it is, I at least need to get my basic education that's going to set me up for foundation for life. And
Right.
my last thing I'll say about that is my brother struggled. One of my brothers struggled with reading and doing schoolwork his entire life. He was a star basketball player, was going on scholarship, got hurt his last year, and no one wanted him to come and play. And he
Mm.
was literally making, barely making C's, like with a tutor.
Mm.
But he went to school. He became an engineer. There's times he took classes 6 times before he passed them. He was in school 8 years for a 4-year degree, but he knew that he wanted to make good money. He knew what kind of house he wanted to have, and was encouraged him, as long as you're trying, you're not finished.
Mm.
So when I'm talking, you may think, hey, I'm not talking about, you got gifted students or this. I've seen the gamut. And I've seen my brother struggle, and I've seen teachers laugh at him, wouldn't help him in tutoring because they're like, you're dumb. Ain't nothing we can do. I mean, like, we can help you if you got a little bit of smarts, but dude, you dumb. And ain't nothing we
Mm.
can do to help you. And you need to just drop out. But he never did. He's an engineer. He's very successful today. And he made it.
Wow.
He made it. He accomplished those goals. So same when you're looking at high school, tying their learning to what their lived experience is going to be, helping them to stay motivated,
Right.
working through their challenges, find out what their real learning level is, and help them slowly to get where they're trying to get, while you're also trying to, do that whole compulsory education thing. Don't let them get through 12 years is what I'm saying, and still be no better for it. Their
And
time is worth something.
and it's I really appreciate the connection between your education and your aspirations. That was something I was big on in in
Hmm.
middle school. Um,
Hmm.
seventh grade because it tied very well into eighth grade because you know how well at least down here, seventh grade math determines your eighth grade math determines your track.
Those math tracks. Oh my gosh.
It's crazy. And I would try
Ooh.
that just communicating to the kids like um how it all connects basically. And I appreciate your perspective on that for especially for parents to consider. Because I know for parents they're working, for some of them
Hmm.
full time, and then they have high school
Hmm.
kids where it's like, well, they got, they can do that, can handle it, but just wanting them to make sure they stay connected, and that's a good way
Hmm.
for them
Hmm.
to stay connected is to sit down and have a conversation about aspirations, whether it's a senior or a freshman. I think other thing that's going to be interesting though too is because I didn't have assessments down here anyway at the end of the year, you don't have those scores to kind of see where
Hmm.
they were at the end of that year. And I know there's several assessments available online. I think
Yes,
it's
there
like
are.
25 or is it $25? I think CAT's $25. You can take it online.
Yes, it is.
Um, and just, yeah, that's like, I want to do something. I have something in mind that I want to do, and it's going to take some time. I'll probably end up calling you separately about it. But just there's a lot of people who they want to do it, or they want to connect. They want to do their best with their kids during the season, but they also have to work, and they just don't know.
Absolutely.
I feel like a lot of
Absolutely.
homeschool parents do know, a lot of virtual parents kind of do know, and that's why I wanted to create this series because I think it's a good way for us to help each other versus being like, all right, yeah,
Hmm.
like
Well,
just
you know what? Let me tell you, because I guess I haven't given a lot of practice skills. I've given a lot of philosophy and
hmm.
theory. You got your Khan Academy. You have your
Yes, we
study
love them.
islands. Okay, now study islands is a little bit more expensive. But honestly, if you think about, this kid needs a tutor and I can't afford, $500, a month or 2 months, just think study islands like $100 for the year. Maybe
Hmm.
you save up for it. Maybe you see if an aunt or a grandparent will
Birthday
help you
gift.
go in on it. But the reason why I'm mentioning it is when you're doing like a study island or they have the Alex and all this stuff that they're doing, you can't progress to the next thing if you don't know what you're on. They'll keep giving you practice, they'll keep training you. And that way the student knows, like, oh, I've done this for 3 days and I can't progress to the next level. And it's like, okay,
Mhm.
you can take 2 hours on a Saturday afternoon and say, let's go through, show me what you've been doing. But here's
Right,
the thing, don't take over that session. Don't think that you are there to solve it. You're there to facilitate.
right,
So basically, tell me what you've been doing. Why'd you do that? Well, did
right.
you think about this? This is what I would do this is the next step I would do. What's missing here? All those are very helpful questions. Whereas you may not know how to solve that problem, but you can ask. I mean, that's a job skill. You can't ask the right questions.
Right.
If I don't understand something, all you're typing into Google is the problem. There's sites you type in the problem, they'll give you the answer. And they'll even show you how to get it.
Yep,
You don't have to have tons of time all day, but you can take 2 hours on a weekend and work through
yep,
what was the most challenging thing.
yep. I totally agree. I'm all about asking questions. I think as I've progressed with the boys, the older ones in particular, I've had to catch myself and just like tonight, we had an issue with the trash. And I don't know how, but the top of the trash just, got holes in it and it ripped. And I wanted to be like, why didn't you do, I was like,
Yeah.
you guys got to figure it out. And that's all I said. I was like, figure it out. And it got to a messy point. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to box this whole floor. But
Yes.
they figured it out. Like, I did have to stop and be like, wait, 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 the chicken something. But just being like, okay, where do you think your hands need to go, or what do you think would just asking questions.
Right,
I'm so
right.
big on that, so I appreciate that as well. Um,
There's it's a parenting curriculum called Love and Logic, and it basically talks about, it's more so like a Christian base, even evangelical. Some people may find that it's not helpful if
mhm.
they even, looked up the email, or up the videos on YouTube. But the main point is that you don't solve kids' problems, you help them to solve their own. And it
Yeah,
may cost you a little more time, it may cost you a little more money, but once they have learned it, they have learned
yes.
it. You will not be back there again.
Yes. And I think also just to put a note like that doesn't apply to like situations of life and danger, life and death. Like
Right, right, right. Now
I'm the
that's when you
advocate.
do something different. That is definitely when you do something different.
Just because I feel
Yeah,
like some parents would be like, oh, well, he grown, he should have known better. Be like, oh no, that's not
yeah,
what we
yeah.
meant.
We're not talking about that.
Right. But and I know that's not you either. So just to kind of
Right.
close it out, I wanted to for you to any final thoughts that you would like to give? Because you talked about things that worked for you guys. We didn't really touch on things that didn't work, but that's okay because you have. I'm sitting here like, oh, I can't wait to go back through this interview and say no. But just any final thoughts that you have for parents right now, whether they have a preschooler, whether they're single,
Hmm.
whether they have a blended family, whether they have a deployed spouse, like just kind of
Hmm.
give a general encouragement during this upcoming school year that's different than what anybody has experienced
Hmm.
ever.
I will tell you this, being a homeschooling parent, being home, even though it was hard to be on one income, that still was a place of privilege. And for many, they don't have those kinds of situations. And so they feel that they can't do. They see what feels impossible. But this is what I always say, you can only do what you can do. And at
Mm,
least do that. Don't look at what you can't do and then don't do anything. That's irresponsible. You may be aware of what you can't do. You may be upset about what you can't do, but at least do what you can do to the best of your ability. They're not going to be 20 trying to figure out how to read if you've taken some time and just work with them where they were.
mm,
They're not going to most of the time be 40 and unemployable, even though they may choose not to work. You
mm,
will have given them enough skills and the years that they have had to be able to do something. And so I say, give yourselves a break, but don't lay down and give up.
mm,
Self-care is important, but please do what you can do. Do it to the best of it. And what you can't do, leave it alone. If you're a praying person, give it to God. But
mhm.
if you're not, maybe you should be thinking about giving it to God. But I will say, do what you can do to the best of your ability. I mean, that's all you can do.
A to the men. A to
Hmm.
yes.
Hmm.
Thank you so much for
Thank
joining
you.
us. I feel like I need to bring you back.
Thank
You said
you.
some other things I have questions about, and I'm like, I feel like E's gonna be like, babe, come on, let's go. But I really do appreciate your wisdom. I appreciate
Sure.
your time that you gave. To all of you who are watching, if you are not a subscriber to the Life with Gains podcast, you can catch us on YouTube, Life with Gains. You can also catch us on Instagram, Life with Gains podcast, Facebook, Life with Gains. This will be loaded for you to watch over and over again. And we hopefully will actually have a surprise for you with Jill Gaines later on this week. So thank you guys. We'll see you next time. Bye.
So, as a homeschooler, I did want to go back and touch working with students that have cognitive or behavioral delays. As a tutor,
I got a lot of students that were wrestling with things and they were not able to progress even though they wanted to. So, first, I want to say that I believe my philosophy is that all students can learn. They just learn different things, they learn at different rates. But you have to take what you have and make the best out of it. And so I think when you are working with ADHD, a student that has ADHD, rather, you have to see how it's presenting because every student is different in how it presents. Some have, just the concentration issues. Some have the bodily, I've got a lot of energy, I can't settle down type of issues. And some have just been so demotivated because they recognize that they're not measuring up in their mind to their peers, and that has really tamped down on what they could do or what they do. Sometimes you got physiological issues that are going on, or you have trauma that is presenting itself as ADHD. A lot of the symptoms may seem the same. So I want to say if you're a parent at home that has to work, do homeschool now with a child, and you've never experienced how to motivate, how to get skills and helping your kid to learn, and it just turns into learning has been a battleground, the first thing you're going to have to do with the student is to gain trust. They need to know that when they're not able to do something, be able to trust what your reaction is going to be. A child cannot learn well if they're overly stressed. So they know that, wow, mom doesn't see me any different. I'm not stupid to her. Dad doesn't see me any different. When I don't know the answer and I don't even know the first step to take to get to an answer, homeschooling is still as possible. Once you develop that trust, then the child is free to be curious and ask questions or say, can you go over this again? Or I can't remember the steps. Those are practical things that you have to put in place. So I worked with a student who he had no organization. Literally, once he did something, he could not remember anything about what he did. I mean, even one of my children had trouble reading, and you have to get these little knacks or hacks, shall I say, in place to help your student learn. So by knowing that they can trust you, by knowing what their issues are, you can begin to tackle that problem together. Kids have a lot of good solutions once they're able to identify the problem in a safe environment to where they're not having to defend themselves, they're not having to take up for themselves. Once that has been disarmed, then you can really start dealing with the core issues. So I wanted to share that. If you have a student who has lots of different challenges, it is still possible. You just need to find out where they are and begin to brainstorm what works. You may brainstorm that 10, 20 times, but it's not a waste. You just found out what didn't work, and now you have another opportunity to figure out what does work. And I think every homeschooling parent experiences that. I'm a planner. Some of you all may not be planners. But as a planner, I just kept saying, let's try this, let's try that. And you think, yeah, that's fine if you're a planner. But actually, I found out that 35, actually, I think it was 53 plans I counted up over the years that did not work. It was a lot of frustration, exhaustion that went into those 53 things that didn't work. But I can tell you that we took the time to find out what does work. Now, here's the other thing I want to say is if you're a parent that has your own learning disabilities and you haven't gotten through your own issues, much less your child's, you can do it together. Because more than likely some of those struggles were passed down and it's been contextualized in a similar way. So you have the opportunity to learn with your child what does work if you're willing to face your own fears of what you weren't able to do then. Because as an adult, you have different coping skills, and now you're an adult learner and you're able to face things differently than what you did as a 17, a 15, or 10, or 9-year-old. So have that faith and that courage to face something you feel you've never been able to face, but you'll find with your adult skills and being out in the workforce that you can approach them differently and you'll overcome yourself and you'll be able to help your child overcome. So that I wanted to say about working with learning behavioral difficulties. I do want to touch a little bit more on the behavioral difficulties. Is that, believe it or not, it really does start with safety. Is this home stable enough? And you may ask the questions of your child. Hey, what feels safe for you? What feels good for you? When you're not able to do something, what's one thing that you can do for yourself to help you cope? We'll do that. That relationship in a learning environment is so key. And then the expectations. If your child has done something 20 times and they haven't been able to accomplish it, do you say, oh, forget it? He'll never be able to learn this. She'll never be able to do this. Or do you say, we're going to find out a way to make this work. We'll take a break now, or we'll take a break this week. We found out 5 things that didn't work. That's not the end of the story. We're in the middle, and the middle is messy. We will get to the end of this, and there will be more resolution than what we currently have. And that's kind of like you have to have a philosophy of a problem solver. Every child's not going to be able to go through a traditional education straight through without having large problems. As a matter of fact, most kids, because they're a different type of learner, have some type of problem. You have to understand that a static mindset is one that says, this is it, status quo, it cannot get better. A dynamic mindset is one that says, I may not know what the answer is now, but I will find an answer that works. So your mindset in approaching homeschool is very important. Then you have to develop the skills of how do I do this? And it's a lot of start, stop, we'll get to the end one day. And you have to have patience. You have to have patience. So I wanted to share those pieces in case you're experiencing a lot of issues with a child that maybe was in a school system, you had intervention specialists, you had people on your team, and now the team has now become you, and you're one person, and you feel overwhelmed, and you feel like you can't do it. You can still do it. It's just a matter of how you get there. Will you have the same results as 5 people? Probably not. But you're going to have to start where you are to get to where you're trying to go. But being able to set manageable goals, sometimes your goal is way too lofty. You're missing 2, 3, 5 steps in between to get to where you need to go. You'll learn that when you realize, this didn't work. Why didn't it work? Oh, because I tried to get him to go from reading sight words like a and b and the and with, and now all of a sudden I've set in front of him a paragraph, or set in front of her a paragraph that's more like chapter books. There's a lot of spaces, a lot of levels, steps in between that you have to address before you can get there. So those are things that failure is not where you stop. Failure is a good place to start. It tells you what hasn't worked, and it tells you that you have more to do. But please don't stop at failure, because you'll never get to success. But they do go hand in hand. You fail to get to success, and your success is sweeter because you have failed. They do work together. Thank you.